Um, Today we're gonna do another master react. We're reacting to five crazy neighbor. It's five crazy neighbor stories. Okay, got this. So let's get the video.
A few years ago, I came home from work to find my girlfriend sitting on the couch with a blank look on her face. I asked her what the matter was.
Sorry about that.
A few years ago, I came home from work to find my girlfriend sitting on the couch with a glum look on her face.
Okay.
When I asked her what the matter was, she gave me that fateful line. We need to talk. She told me she wasn't happy in our relationship anymore and that she thought that we should take a break to see other people. Essentially so we could decide if we really were supposed to be together.
Why?
I really didn't want to, but I loved her enough to respect her decision and I agreed. I thought if I at least gave her idea a try, I'd eventually win her back, but a few weeks later our relationship was well and truly over, and I had to move out of the apartment that we shared. Since it was technically her apartment first, obviously I had to find a new place to live and fast. So I definitely didn't take all the time I should have to find somewhere decent, and I ended up paying for it pretty badly. The place I ended up renting was a one-room studio apartment in a building that
That
straight
looks
up
like a
looked like a
crime
haunted
scene.
house. I mean, that probably should have been a warning right there, but it was cheap, available, and the landlord only wanted a month's rent in
I don't really
advance to
blame
exchange
him.
for the keys. Plus, there was absolutely no way I was about to move back in with my mom and dad. Like they'd be nice enough to offer, but it would have felt like way too much, like a step back, and so I opted for the studio. Moving in was easy enough. I didn't have all that much in the way of possessions to take with me, and honestly, I just couldn't be bothered arguing with my then ex-girlfriend about who was entitled to what. The whole thing had been unpleasant enough without souring the broken relationship even further with petty arguments over furniture. Besides, as long as I had my Xbox and my 4K telly, I'd be happy enough. So the day after I move in, I knock at the flat across the hall for me to introduce myself to my neighbor. There was this thumping bass beat coming from the other side, so I knew someone was home. But when they answered, I was pretty shocked at how frank and unfriendly they were. The guy was quite
What?
with
Look at his
dark
face.
beard
Look at
and
his
a Cockney
face.
accent.
Oh my
He didn't
god.
open the door the whole way. He just opened like a little crack before peering out. I introduced myself, told him I moved in across the hallway from him, and added that if he ever needed to borrow a cup of sugar or anything, he knew where to find me. But all I got in return was this cold, nervous stare. I figured I might have interrupted him in something, so I apologized and added that my name was Ollie. He replied, telling me his name was Jack. I know this sounds mad, but I got the distinct impression it was a name that he just plucked out of the air. Just something in my gut told me that, as weird as this sounds, and that he just made it up on the spot. But I'm not really the paranoid type, so I just put it down to him being a generally awkward person or whatever before I disappeared back into my flat.
With new people.
A
Just
few
leave
weeks
the neighbor
later,
alone.
I was just leaving my flat to head off to work
Is
when
that him?
I saw a guy leaving Jack's flat. I wished him a good morning, and he wished me the same, and I followed up by asking him if he was one of Jack's friends or his flatmate or something. Who? He replies.
He's like, who?
It was then that I smelled the alcohol in his breath. I repeated the question, pointing towards the door of the flat and reiterating that it was Jack's flat. Yeah, I'm Jack's mate, he said, before continuing down the stairs and out the front door. Now this one I definitely knew was a lie, and it was that which clued me into the fact that the original guy had been lying to me too. Something weird was going on with that flat, but just exactly what it was I couldn't possibly imagine at that stage.
Don't.
So, this keeps happening for
Just-
about a fortnight
just leave it
longer
alone.
with
It's none of
me
your
catching
business.
different people going in and out of the flat across the hallway at all hours of the night. So when the landlord calls to pick up the next month's rent, I bring up the tenants from across the hall and ask him exactly who it is that lives there. He racks his brain for a moment, finally coming up with the name Steven as the name of the tenant, adding that he's the best tenant he's ever had. How there are no noise complaints, how he always pays the rent on time, and on the first day of every
But
month,
he
we get a
kind of
direct
looks
debit
like he's on
deposit into
crack.
his bank account. I was on the verge of telling him all about the different people I'd seen, but it wasn't really any of my business, was it?
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, it was probably something a bit dodgy going on over there, but as long as no one was getting hurt. What did it have to do with me? I'm not a grass, so I've never been. It's just not my nature, so I kept my gob shut, even though in time I'd really wish that I hadn't. About a week later, I was asleep in bed when something woke me up.
Or sleep in the
A
couch.
sound coming from outside my flat. It was of heavy footfalls on the stairs, and somehow I knew it was something to do with the flat across the hall. As I lay there all
Talk about no
blurry-eyed, I
noise
finally decided I was going to put a complaint into the landlord, but was nearly scared out of my skin when I heard a series of loud bangs on the front of my flat. Merseyside Police, open the door or we smash it in.
This is
My heart began
just
to
wow.
race. So hard that I could
I
actually
just
hear
can't
it
believe
pumping in
this,
my
you know?
ears.
Like I'm even
I was
stumbling over
frozen
my
in the
words.
spot
I'm
for a
stammering
moment,
here. You know
and it took another few bangs and another shot before I could even get my head together.
There's not my dad.
Pulling back the mortise lock before opening up the door. The next thing I know, there's a torch in my face, completely blinding me as a pair of armed, tactically dressed policemen storm in my flat and throw me to the ground.
What?
Hands behind your back.
What did you do wrong?
Getting shot, one screamed, not even waiting for me to obey him as he pulled my hands into the small of my back and placed them in cuffs. Get the bloody light on, Rich, he said to the other policeman, pulling me up onto my knees and telling me to stay put. So I'm up on my knees, facing the door of my flat, with the other officer keeping his back against the door, drawing it open. I can see that there is another pair of police officers who've been banging on the door of the flat across the hall, only there's no reply from inside. No one comes to open the door. So up comes
Just
this other policeman
use a
with
barricade
one of
and take that
those
thing down.
door
Thank
basher
you.
things. I don't know the proper name.
Is that a
only
flashlight or
one of the
barricade?
police called it the big key. They smashed their way
Barricade,
into the door,
Yeah.
screaming as they went. I figured they start dragging out whoever was in there, or at least being as aggressive as they were with me. But bizarrely, it was almost the opposite tone. It was verging on kind and caring. And I listened in confusion as they asked the person, "Are you all right? Do you know where you are? Can you hear me?" It was a minute or so later I watched in absolute horror
What?
as one officer
Why is
walked out of the
he? Why
flat
is he
carrying
hurt?
a girl
Like why?
who couldn't have been any older than a teenager. She was barely dressed, covered in bruises, and her hair was a greasy mess that was plastered to her scalp.
She looks like
I
14.
looked up at one of the
something.
officers, a look of pure shock and revulsion on my face. "Let me guess, you didn't know anything about it. Why don't you just save it for the interview?" he says. But I didn't. I swear to God I didn't. And I told the police who questioned me down at the station the exact thing when they asked me all sorts of things about human
Why is the gun
trafficking
right there?
rings.
Is he threatening to kill him or
When they tried to
something?
get me to admit that I was the ringleader or something, and swore blind that I had no idea what they were talking about. There's another pair of police officers who've been banging on the door of the flat across the
Let's
hall,
just skip forward.
only there's no reply. So please, as much as it might
Go
go
forward.
again, let me guess, you didn't know anything about it.
Exactly.
Why don't you just save it for the interview? He says.
That's true, he doesn't.
But I didn't. I swear to God I didn't. And I told the police who questioned me down at the station the exact thing when they asked me all sorts
You
of
gonna
things
die.
about human trafficking rings.
You
I
gonna
broke down in
die.
tears when they tried to get me to admit that I was the ringleader or something, and swore blind that I had no idea what they were talking about, and that I'd never do anything like that, and that I just didn't have it in me. Eventually, they let me go, satisfied that I didn't have anything to do with it, but I was horrified that something like that couldn't have been going on
I
right
was
under my
gonna move
nose.
up straight
That
away.
I'd smiled and joked with some of the scumbags that had frequented that flat, completely unaware of the hellishly cruel things they'd been getting up to inside of it. I ended up moving back in with my mom and dad not long after. I just
Ain't
couldn't live in that
smart.
place anymore.
Cause you don't know
And I couldn't
what if
cope
that
with
girl,
looking for a new place.
what happened to
Intense
that girl
paranoia of not knowing
happens to
what was
me.
going on
Like
behind
what if I'm
closed
the
doors
next
all
victim?
around me.
So it's better to be safe than sorry.
I just go against all of your F the police
It's better
mentalities.
to be more safer than sorry.
Just
you
call
know?
the police if you think something weird is happening like that near you. Because it is our business. It's all of our business. And that decision might be the difference between someone's freedom and an existence of pure torture. I'm from a city in the northwest of my country called the
This
Governor
is the
Hills.
same guy.
It is a very beautiful place. Some call it the City of Flowers. I love love Garanoons, but I cannot live there anymore. There are too many bad memories for me, and people accuse me of something which I am innocent of. You see, 8 years ago, I lived next to a family called the Negromontes. They seem like very nice people, but they did not.
Okay, let's move it to the middle. Okay, so if you want to see more of my Metro reactions, make sure to smash that notification bell, make that subscribe button turn gray, and make sure to leave a comment and a like on this video. See you next time. Peace!